Good morning, everyone. Today, we're going to discuss an important and often overlooked topic, the ethical considerations in natural language processing, or NLP, specifically the issue of bias in language models. As policymakers, it's crucial for you to understand how this technology works and the implications it has for the communities you serve. Let's start with what bias means in the context of NLP. Language models, like ChatGPT or others, are trained on vast amounts of text data collected from the internet, books, and other sources. These models learn patterns and relationships in the data to generate responses. However, the data they're trained on is not neutral. It reflects the biases, stereotypes, and inequalities present in our society. For example, if a model is trained on text where certain professions are predominantly associated with one gender, it might reproduce or even amplify these associations in its outputs. Why does this matter? Imagine an automated system used for hiring decisions that screens resumes. If it's based on a language model trained on biased data, it might favor certain demographics over others, perpetuating inequality in employment. Bias can also show up in more subtle but equally harmful ways. For instance, a customer service chatbot might respond differently to users based on their perceived gender or ethnicity, creating an unfair or even hostile experience for some people. Where does this bias come from? Primarily, it stems from the data used to train these models. If the data contains stereotypes or underrepresents certain groups, the model learns and reflects that imbalance. But it's not just about the data. The design and training process itself can introduce bias. For example, the way algorithms are optimized or the goals set by developers can inadvertently reinforce existing inequalities. Let me give you a real-world example. A few years ago, a language model released by a major tech company was found to associate negative traits with certain minority groups more frequently than others. This wasn't a deliberate design choice, it was a consequence of the data it had been exposed to. These kinds of issues highlight the need for vigilance and ethical responsibility in developing and deploying these systems. Now, how can we detect bias in language models? One approach is to test how a model responds to different prompts. For example, if you ask a model to complete a sentence like "the nurse said," and it overwhelmingly assumes the nurse is a woman, that's a sign of gender bias. Similarly, disparities in the way the model responds to names associated with different ethnicities can point to racial bias. Tools like the Word Embedding Association Test, or WEAT, can help systematically analyze these patterns. The question you might be asking now is, what can we do about it? The good news is that researchers and developers are working on ways to reduce bias. One method is to use more diverse and representative datasets to train these models. Another approach is to apply techniques that debias the data or the model itself. For example, developers can adjust the algorithms to minimize harmful stereotypes or ensure that outputs are more equitable. But technical fixes alone are not enough. As policymakers, you play a vital role in shaping the ethical frameworks around AI. This includes setting guidelines for transparency, accountability, and fairness in AI systems. Developers and companies should be required to disclose how their models are trained, what data is used, and how they test for bias. Independent audits and ongoing monitoring can also help ensure these systems align with societal values. Lastly, let's talk about responsibility. Ethical AI is not just a technical challenge, it's a societal one. Policymakers, developers, companies, and even end users all share responsibility for ensuring these systems are used fairly and equitably. As you consider implementing AI in public services, from education to healthcare, remember that these tools are only as good as the data and values we build into them. Bias in language models is not an insurmountable problem, but addressing it requires a proactive approach. By understanding these issues and advocating for ethical practices, you can help create AI systems that serve everyone, not just a privileged few. Thank you.